Hello and welcome back to Khan Academy Live SAT. I'm Eric, I'm an SAT tutor and one of the SAT experts here at Khan Academy. And today is our third and final class as a part of this series. We've covered SAT Math 2 weeks ago. Last week we covered SAT Reading, and today we'll be on SAT Writing. Now, if you missed any of those previous classes, don't worry, just head to our YouTube channel and you can find the class recording there where you can rewatch, pause, fast forward, do whatever you need to get what you want out of those videos. And if you're joining us for the first time, one quick tech tip to help you get the most out of this class is to go to full screen on YouTube and try and up the resolution to the best quality that you can, because we'll be going through real SAT writing questions, and so being able to read everything will be really helpful. So today's class is on SAT writing, so before we dive into the materials, let's take a look at the topics for today. So first up, I'm going to do some instruction and some practice problems. And so the first thing I'm going to do is provide a quick overview of the writing test and share some tips for how you can mark up the test and be more proactive when it comes to SAT writing questions. Next up, I'm going to cover subject-verb agreement and do some practice problems. And third, I'm going to go over sentence punctuation and again do some real practice problems. In the middle, I'll pause for some Q&A, and actually as I'm going through this writing class, feel free to throw in any questions that you have as I'm going along into the YouTube chat, and then I'll get to as many as I can in the middle there. And then finally, I'm going to close things out by working through an SAT writing passage. And so this is going to be a 45-minute class all told, and so that's a sneak peek at what is ahead, and so there's a lot of material to cover, a lot of grammar, a lot of writing concepts to learn, and so let's jump into the very first topic. So first, a quick overview of the SAT writing and language test. So in total, this is a 35-minute section, and you have 35 minutes to do 4 passages with 11 questions each. And so what I want to emphasize here is that means you do need to move at a decent pace throughout, but you'll notice that all of these questions come within passages, and so context is very important. And so it's a bit like the SAT reading section in that what comes before and after the question is really important in helping you find the right answer. So that's what you'll have to expect. And then in terms of topics and passage types, here's a sneak peek at that. And so you'll have a variety of topics that fall into a variety of passage type options. Then in terms of the questions that you can expect to see, there are 2 that I want to call out. The first are expression of ideas questions, and these really ask you to improve the effectiveness of communication. And so what that means is, it might ask you how you might clarify and add clarity to the passage. It might ask you to strengthen an argument. So it's all about communicating the author's point more effectively. The second question type focuses on standard English conventions, and this is probably what you might be more used to seeing, and this is all about grammar, punctuation, and all those great rules that you've learned in your English and reading classes in high school. So that's a bit of an overview of the writing test. And now I'll move on to how you can mark up the writing and language test. And the reason I'm talking about marking up the writing and language test is that being proactive is a great tool, not only in math and reading, but also here. And so this really helps engage your mind as you're reading through the passage and working through the questions if you are marking things up. And so there are 4 things that I would suggest you try. The first is to annotate the passage as you go. So this is underlining and annotating things like the topic sentence, which is the first sentence in the paragraph. It's circling things like but or however, these kind of contrast words that convey meaning, that sort of thing. The second thing I suggest is that you underline the question and the answer choices. And why this is important is that you want to make sure you're answering the right question. And then on the answer choices, what I would call out is that one word can make an answer choice wrong. Can make a choice wrong. Make a choice wrong. And so this attention to detail and looking through each answer choice is really important. Third thing I would suggest is to cross out words to simplify long sentences. And this simplification is the name of the game. And where you'll see this most often in the writing test is with something called a prepositional phrase. And so prepositional phrases start with words like or above or before. So those are a few things that you want to look out for. And by crossing out prepositional phrases, you can often simplify subject-verb agreement sentences. It can make it much clearer what's the subject and what's the verb. Finally, I encourage you to use process of elimination. And so you can cross out the letter, you can cross out the whole thing. Really, the more active you are in crossing out things that are wrong, the better it is, so that you don't use any more mental energy to go through it. So we'll get a chance to use all of these tactics in the practice problems ahead and in the practice writing and language passage. So that's a quick overview of what you can expect on the SAT writing and language section, and a few tips for how you can be more proactive as you're working through the passage, reading it, and doing some questions. Now we're going to move on to some grammar, and hopefully some of this looks familiar to you, but if not, don't worry. We're going to do a quick review and then do some practice problems to reinforce it. So let's take a look at the first concept. So subject-verb agreement is topic number 1. Now, the first thing you want to remember when it comes to subject-verb agreement is that a complete sentence or an independent clause must always have a subject and a verb that agree. And the subject, as a reminder, is the person, place, or thing that is doing or being something. And so it is the actor. Act that's being executed. And what you want to remember in terms of agreement is that singular subjects always go with singular verbs, and plural subjects go with plural verbs. And so this is the agreement part of the subject-verb agreement. And this topic is one that shows up in so many different contexts within the SAT writing and language component. And so it's worth refreshing and making sure that you have a good understanding of what is a subject and verb, what is an independent clause, also what is a dependent clause. And a few tips I have when it comes to approaching subject-verb questions are that you should find the subject of the sentence first, then check for agreement. And so that's all about identifying the actor. And so in this case, the dog is going to be your subject, and the action that the dog is doing is barking. And so once you know who the actor is, it makes it a lot easier to narrow down, does this agree or not? The next tip is one that I've mentioned before, and this is around crossing out unnecessary words to simplify. And so what I mean here is looking for prepositional phrases that separate the subject and the verb. So the dog, along with the cat, was convinced that it was nap time. So in this case, the subject is, any thoughts on what the subject is? If you have a guess, go ahead and type that into the text box, into the chat. So the subject here is the dog. So it's just the dog. And what I can cross out is this whole part here, along with the cat, because that is a prepositional phrase, and a prepositional phrase is never the subject. So prepositional phrase, prepositional is such a long word, so I'm just going to abbreviate it. And so the dog was convinced that it was nap time. And so in this case, I've identified that. And so then we have the verb here, was convinced. And so there you have it. So these are some quick refreshers of what subject-verb agreement is all about. And you might be thinking, okay, I got it. Let's get to some practice problems. Well, I agree. So let's do some practice problems, apply what we've discussed about being proactive in marking up the answers and the questions, and keeping all of these things in mind. But before that, I want to throw a few questions and pronouns your way to test, what is singular and what is plural. So let's take a look. So subject-verb agreement. Are these phrases singular or plural? And so we're going to step through each one of these. And as I'm going through, if you think you know the answer, go ahead and type that in, and then I'll share the answer and why that is. So he or she, is it singular or plural? So that one is singular, and that one is more straightforward. It's an individual. It's referring to he or she, and so that one is more straightforward. But what about this next one? Anyone or each one? Anyone or each one. Is that singular or plural? So that one is also singular. And that's because this is what is called an indefinite pronoun. And it's one of those parts of the English language where it actually will be helpful to memorize, what pronouns fall into this category, because indefinite pronouns are always singular, even though they might sound like they're referring to multiple or many people. So that one is also going to be singular. What about we? Singular or plural? So this one is going to be plural. And so we is referring to multiple people, and so that one, probably makes sense. Now, what about this next one of everyone and everybody? Is that going to be singular or plural? And some of y'all might be thinking, well, is it the one? Am I thinking about the one and it should be singular, or am I thinking about the every? Because then that's talking about lots of people. So singular or plural? This one is also going to be singular, and this is an indefinite pronoun again. And so this is another example of where, memorizing that this is an indefinite pronoun will help you with subject-verb agreement questions and making sure that you pick the verb choice that agrees. Now, what about somebody? Somebody, singular or plural? That is also going to be singular. So again, we have this indefinite pronoun, and so you're spotting the pattern here. And so I'll move on to the next one. The turkey as well as the chicken. Turkey as well as the chicken. Singular or plural? So this one is, yet again, singular. So turkey is the subject here, and as well as the chicken is actually a prepositional, not a prepositional phrase, but it does not create a compound subject. And so all of this, the only subject in this sentence is going to be the turkey. Now, last one, the James and I. Singular or plural? So this one is finally plural, and the reason for that is and is a conjunction, in that and creates a compound subject, and that compound subject involves two individuals, and that is James and I, and so that is why that is going to be plural. So now we've done some of that to kind of really give you a refresher of some of those trickier pronouns, and now we're going to do a practice problem. And so here's where, if you weren't in full screen before, it'll really help so that you can read the text and read the question. So let's take a look. Practice question number 1. Billy, although he had a great sense of timing for stand-up comedy, were handicapped by his poor memory. So Billy, although he had a great sense of timing for stand-up comedy, were handicapped by his poor memory. And so what I want to do here is I want to find the subject. What is the subject? So that subject is going to be Billy. And so this is going to be singular, and were is actually plural, and so we have an issue here, and so this should be Billy was handicapped by his poor memory, and so we have answer choice C there, and so that does not work. Billy have been handicapped by his poor memory is incorrect, and we're being handicapped again does not agree, given the tense and the singular nature of the subject there. So that was a good warm-up question. Let's keep going to the next one. So with the help of the Matsu Regional Medical Center, middle school students in Gateway, Alaska observe intubation and sets bones. So with the help of the Matsu Regional Medical Center, middle school students in Gateway, Alaska observe intubation and sets bones. So what do you think is the subject here? Because that is, again, the first step that I would take is I would think about what the subject is. So subject here is going to be middle school students. And what is the action that they're doing? So here is observe intubation and sets bones. And so this one, the question actually helps you out here because this observe intubation is not underlined, and so that part has to be correct. You can't change it, and so you have to assume that that is a given. And so this verb, is it singular or plural? Students observe. Well, I've got students here, subject, this is the subject. Students there, and so this is plural, students observe. And what about sets bones? So there, that is actually singular, and that is not correct. It does not agree with this subject, which is plural, over here. And so this should be middle school students set bones. And so there I have it, answer choice D. And then all of this is a phrase that I can cross out. So with the help of the Matsu Regional Center, that is not part of the subject. And so it's fair for me to ignore that, to simplify the sentence and just focus in on the plural subject that I have here and the verbs that I have here. Great, so those were two of our three subject-verb agreement questions. And now we're going to do one final one to get some extra practice, and then we'll move on to the next concept and do some Q&A, and then do the writing passage with questions. So let's keep on going. Okay, so adventure climbers like Alex Honnold specializes in free solo ascents without ropes up sheer cliff faces such as El Capitan and Yosemite National Park. So adventure climbers like Alex Honnold specializes in free solo ascents without ropes up sheer cliff faces. So what do you think is the subject in this sentence? So we have, some of you might be thinking it is climbers. Some of you might think it's Alex Honnold. And so actually, I'll mark those in a different color there. Climbers or Alex Honnold? Now, which one do you think it is? Well, it's actually going to be climbers. So your subject is climbers. And the reason for that is this phrase, like Alex Honnold, is one of those prepositional phrases that I mentioned. So prepositional phrases. And prepositional phrases can never be the subject of a sentence. And so in this case, it is just climbers, specializes in free solo ascents. And so specializes is going to be your verb here. And so we've got subject there, and that's going to be plural subject. So plural, and then specializes, is that singular or plural? Climbers specializes. So specializes is incorrect. It should be specialize. So we got to take that off. And so there is going to be our answer choice C. And so, the rest of this sentence is great. So free solo ascents in El Capitan and Yosemite, great places. It's a great national park. You should go if you haven't been. But it doesn't really matter for the grammar and accuracy of the sentence. And so if you just focus in on the subject and the verb and just cross out prepositional phrases and focus in on climbers here and specializes, it really helps to simplify the sentence and focus in on what the error is. And what you'll notice is I've been doing something interesting here in these practice problems in that I have, dissected the sentence by looking at the subject, and then I figured out, is this right or not? Right or not? And then if it's, been wrong, I've asked, how would I fix? How to fix. And with that, it makes it a lot easier to figure out, is it no change? Is it B? Is it C? Is it D? And so knowing if it's grammatically correct or not, predicting how to fix it and then matching to the answer can really help. So those are the subject-verb agreements questions that we have for today. And now I'm going to move on to sentence punctuation, and in particular within sentence punctuation. And this really builds off of the subject-verb agreement that we've started out with, because subject and verbs, so a complete independent clause will have a subject and a verb. And what we're about to get into, how you connect independent and dependent clauses, depends all on your ability to figure out, is this, a complete sentence by itself or not? So hopefully you're joining us midway. Feel free to back up and watch, and you'll catch up eventually. So let's look at sentence punctuation next, which is another really common topic that you'll see on the SAT writing. So sentence punctuation, and so let's take a look. The first two pieces of punctuation I'm going to look at are the semicolon and the period. And these, as a refresher, are used to separate two independent clauses that each have a subject and a verb. And so that's the definition of an independent clause or complete sentence. You want to have a subject and a verb. And so an example here is, Yoda can read minds, semicolon, I hate playing card games against him. And so I'll just make this very clear. And so this is an independent clause here, and this is another independent clause here. Now, the next piece of punctuation is the comma and the conjunction. And so these are used to join clauses by converting one clause into a dependent clause. And so an example sentence here is, George Lucas is a creative genius, comma, but episode 3 was not his best work. And so that's a comma and a conjunction. And so this is going to be your independent clause. And then this is going to be your dependent clause there. Finally, I have the dash and the semicolon. And these are used to introduce a list, quote, or explanation. And what you want to remember is that the part of the sentence that comes before the dash or the colon must be an independent clause. So an example here is, Star Wars movies always start with the same phrase, colon, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And so this first part is an independent clause, and so that's what makes this semicolon correct. And in case you can't tell already, I'm a big Star Wars fan, so hopefully these sentences weren't too agonizing for you. So that's a quick refresher on a few of the most important types of punctuation that you want to know how to work with and interact with on the SAT writing and language test. Now we're going to do some practice problems to apply what you've learned and see what it's like in context. Okay, so again, if you're just joining us, you'll want a full screen just so you can read the question and the sentences more easily. So President Thomas Jefferson had one slightly unusual dream. He hoped to find a living woolly mammoth in the western United States. So President Thomas Jefferson had one slightly unusual dream. He hoped to find a living woolly mammoth in the western United States. Okay, so what I want to do here, so I'll just emphasize that's a comma, is figure out what kind of clauses I'm connecting. So this is, clause number 1, and this is clause number 2. And so clause number 1, is that an independent or a dependent clause? So does it have if it's independent, it's going to have a subject and verb by itself and be able to stand alone. So hopefully you said that was an independent clause. And then what about the second one? He hoped to find a living woolly mammoth in the western United States. So that one's also an independent clause. And in this case, which type of punctuation do you think works here? Is it going to be no change, a colon, semicolon, or a dash? So in this case, it's going to be answer choice B, because the second part of this sentence connects directly to the first and explains what Jefferson's unusual dream was. And so you can, it logically follows, and it is the first part of the sentence introduces the second part, which explains the dream that he had. And so that is going to be your answer choice there. And you'll notice that I'm writing B in big block letters. And the reason for that is that writing this out makes it faster to transfer answers to the bubble sheet, so faster bubbling. and it reduces the chance of a careless mistake, that is bubbling in the wrong answer and carrying the wrong one over. Chance of careless mistakes. Great. So that was one example. Let's keep on going to the next one. So this year's Shark Week on the Discovery Channel features the rarely seen sharks of the Cuban coral reefs. Footage includes in-water and on-water activities with sharks. And in case it's hard to see, that is a semicolon. So this year's Shark Week. And so here again, this first clause, is it independent or dependent? It's going to be an independent clause. And then footage includes in-water and on-water activities with sharks. What about clause number 2? Does it have a subject and verb, and can it stand alone? Yes, it can. So that one is also going to be an independent clause. And so you have 2 independent clauses that are related. And what are the ways to connect 2 independent clauses? Well, we've got the period, or we've got the semicolon, or we could do a comma and conjunction. And so let's see which one would work best here. Well, semicolon, that checks out. Reefs, colon, footage includes in-water and on-water activities. I'll keep that one. That's a possibility. Semicolon and, nope. So if I have a semicolon, that connects 2 independent clauses enough. And then reefs, comma. Well, a comma by itself does not work because it needs a conjunction to be able to connect 2 independent clauses like that. So that is out, and so you're down to 2. And so in this case, I'm going to go with the answer choice A. And the reason A is correct is that this footage actually does. So one is that these are 2 independent clauses. And the second reason is that this footage doesn't tie directly back to the rarely seen sharks directly. And so this no change and semicolon does the best job of connecting the 2 clauses. But in this case, I would have had to ponder a little bit about this. But in this case, the semicolon does the cleanest, easiest, clearest job of separating these 2 independent clauses. And so it's going to be answer choice A there. So this is the last question. But before we get to the last question, I want to emphasize a few things about the approach I've been taking. And so as you'll see with these sentence punctuation practice questions, I've been really focusing on figuring out what kinds of clauses am I connecting. Am I looking at an independent and dependent, independent and independent clause? And as you practice more, you'll get better and faster at identifying what kinds of clauses you're dealing with, and therefore what kind of punctuation would make the sentence grammatically correct. Then similarly to before, once I know what I'm working with, I ask myself, is this correct or not? And if not, how would I fix it? And with that in mind, I can then get to the final answer much more quickly. So this last one is a bit longer, and so get ready, but don't worry, you follow all the exact same processes. And like I mentioned before, if you have questions, feel free to add them into the YouTube chat, and I'll answer them shortly. So last one. Contrary to the popular perception that DNA was Watson and Crick's discovery, its helical structure and phosphate backbone were first recognized by a woman. And that one is a semicolon. The English chemist Rosalind Franklin. So I've got 3 clauses here. Contrary to the popular perception that DNA was Watson and Crick's discovery. This is clause number 2. And I've got clause number 3 here. And so what am I working with clause number 1? So that's going to be a dependent clause. So I don't have the reason I know that is, one, the clause starts out with contrary, and I don't have a subject there. So then what about number 2? Its helical structure and phosphate backbone were first recognized by a woman. Is that an independent or dependent clause? Does it have a subject, complete subject and verb, and can it stand on its own? So that one is a perfectly fine complete sentence, and so that's going to be an independent clause. And what about number 3? The English chemist Rosalind Franklin. So I definitely have a subject there, but I don't have a verb, and so that's going to be a dependent clause. And so now, in terms of connecting this dependent and independent clause, what about this first clauses 1 and 2? Well, I've got a dependent and independent, and I have a conjunction here, and so I think a comma will serve me quite well there. So contrary to the popular perception that DNA was Watson and Crick's discovery, comma, its helical structure and phosphate backbone were first recognized by a woman. And so that's an independent and a dependent clause. So can I connect these two? Can I connect an independent and dependent clause with a semicolon? You cannot. But I could use a colon here, since the English chemist Rosalind Franklin is explaining who this woman is, and this we mentioned was an independent clause. And so I want to look for an answer that has a comma and a semicolon. And so discovery, comma, its helical structure and phosphate backbone were first recognized by a woman, semicolon, so that's out. We said that was wrong. So comma and semicolon, boom. There is my final answer. So as you saw, I kind of broke down all of the clauses here and then figured out what I needed to correctly connect all of them. And so that question was had a little more text involved, was a little trickier. But if you kind of break down the sentence piece by piece, be really active as you go through it, you can really simplify, and even if it looks complicated at first, you can get to the right final answer. So now I'm going to do a few questions, and before I jump into the writing passage. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in there into the chat, and I'll get to as many as I can. Let's see. Is it necessary to read and annotate parts of the passage that have no questions directed to them? Great question, and that you're probably thinking, well, if there are no questions if there are no questions in that part of the passage, do I need to pay as much attention? And I would actually say the answer is yes. And the reason for that is that there are questions in the SAT writing and language test that depend on the context, and almost all of them actually depend on the context. And in particular, questions like, should you add or delete this sentence? Or sentence 7 should best be placed where? All of those questions rely on the context of the paragraph and of the passage. And so if you've skipped over or kind of glossed over those parts, you won't have that critical piece of information that will actually help you answer the question about adding or deleting a sentence, moving a sentence, so on and so forth. So absolutely, you should definitely be paying attention, even if the part of the passage isn't underlined as having a question about it. Okay, how do you suggest we practice how to speed our test-taking pace? So there are a few things I would suggest there. The first would be to go on Khan Academy official SAT practice, and after you finish 3 writing, evidence-based reading and writing practice sessions, you'll be able to unlock a timed mini section. And so these are timed 11-question writing or reading passages where, on Khan Academy, the timer will tick down. And so that's a great way to pace yourself through one passage. The second way I would suggest you practice your timing and pacing is by doing a full-length practice test. And if you find that you mainly have problems in the writing section, it can be practice those full writing sections, have a timer, kind of calculate. If you have 35 questions and 4 passages, 35 divided by 4 is going to be roughly 9 minutes per passage, and so that can be a good mental model. And so practicing that pacing from start to finish would be the second way that I would do it. And so the more practice you have with a real timer, the better and faster you're going to be. Let's see. How should we write our essay? Like, what format would be best? Maybe a 5-paragraph essay? So great question. And so when it comes to the essay, I wouldn't focus purely on the structure. I think if you're comfortable with a 5 paragraph essay and you've gotten used to that in class, that is completely okay to use. But what you want to focus on with the SAT writing and language essay is to really to not restate what the author is saying, because every SAT write essay prompt will will ask you to dissect how the author makes his or her argument using evidence, using persuasive elements and stylistic elements. And so you really want to focus more on answering that prompt and saying and articulating what pieces in the author's writing reinforces his or her point and how that is done in the essay. And you can actually go and practice writing an essay on Official SAT Practice, and we have an essay practice where you can do some pre-writing, do some writing, and then we'll actually generate a score for your essay to tell you where your strengths and weaknesses are. So that's all the time we have for questions now, and so I'm going to jump over to doing the practice passage. And so we're going to go through as many questions as we can before we wrap up. And so let's take a look now at the context of a real SAT writing passage. Okay, so again, here it'll be really important to zoom in as I'm reading the passage. So the political power of first ladies. A high-profile unelected official with the political resources to influence domestic policy, the President of the United States has a wife known as the First Lady. Occupies a unique position. Many First Ladies, not content with simply playing a role of demure wife and social hostess, have taken an active role in the political sphere. And I'm going to go back there. Even though her power comes by way of marriage rather than from the electorate or constitution, the First Lady or First Gentleman has a responsibility to capitalize on her situation and attempt to create significant, lasting change. If the President of the United States is female, her husband's title would be First Gentleman. Throughout U.S. history, there have been a number of influential, politically engaged First Ladies from whom future First Ladies or Gentlemen can take inspiration. Great, so we're talking about First Ladies and First Gentlemen and their obligation to be politically engaged and create positive change. And I've starred the first and last sentence because those tend to be really important to helping me understand the passage. So Abigail Adams, the second First Lady in American history, was first to assume a protruding role in the political sphere. Unlike her predecessor, Martha Washington, Adams was outspoken, well-educated, and quickly developed a reputation of a staunch partisan defender after openly criticizing Congress for not declaring war on France in 1798. Her influence is so well known that opponents claim the president refused to make any appointments without her approbation, and aspiring politicians sought her endorsement. In recent years, Adams has become a popular topic for biographers because of her thoughts on gender, slavery, and politics. Okay, so we're talking about Abigail Adams here in the second part and her achievements. And so we'll just read to that point for now because of time, and we'll tackle the first question here. And I'll zoom in a little bit more so that you can see it. So question 1 of 11. And so you might be wondering, well, what is the question? Well, this is what's called a stemless question. And what you want to do here is go back and find the number 1 in the passage, which is right here. And with that, determine whether you would make no change or if there is a change that would need to be made to either strengthen the communication in the passage or fix a grammatical error. So if you recall, we started this session by saying, those are the 2 main types of questions you can get. And so let's look at question number 1. We'll read some of the context and see. So high-profile elected official with the political resources to influence domestic policy, the President of the United States has a wife, known as the First Lady, occupies a unique position. So, can any of you, so first question, is there an error or not? So, hint, there is an error. So it is not no change, but can any of you spot what the error is in number 1? It is what's called a modifier error. And what that means is that we're talking about the First Lady here. So a high-profile unelected official, that's the First Lady. And then we also followed up with known as the First Lady. And so what's odd here is that we have all of these phrases about the First Lady, and then phrase 1 says, the President of the United States has a wife. Well, all modifiers should be placed very close to, as close as possible to what the object they're describing for clarity. Because in this case, we're talking about the First Lady, but then we have the President right here. And so it makes it confusing. Are we talking about the First Lady or are we talking about the President? And so in this case, the way you would correct this is with answer choice D, because it focuses on the wife of the President of the United States. And then, whereas in answer choice C, United States President has a wife, we're again focusing on the President. And then in answer choice B, we're talking about the United States, which is not even a person. And so this is, the error here is a modifier placement error. And so answer choice D clarifies that by, let's take a marriage. The First Lady has a responsibility to capitalize and create significant lasting change. And then if the President of the United States is female, her husband's title would be First Gentleman. Throughout history, there have been a number of influential and politically engaged First Ladies from whom future First Ladies or Gentlemen can take inspiration. So the first question you want to answer is, should this be kept or deleted? Because if you look at the answer choices here, we've got 2 keeps and 2 deletes. And so if you can make that decision, it cuts out half of the options. And what I like to ask myself here is, does sentence number 2, does it add something meaningful or not? Is it repetitive? And does it add relevant information? And so those are some of the questions that I like to ask myself when I make this decision. And so we have, if the President of the United States is female, her title will be First Gentleman. And so to me, that is an interesting point, but it's also something that we have here, First Lady or First Gentleman. So we mention it, so it is repetitive. So that's 1 strike for deleting it. And then the next thing I want to ask is, is it relevant? So it does relate to the passage, but here we talk about creating significant lasting change. And then in the last sentence, we talk about influential and politically engaged First Ladies and making an impact. And so it's not super relevant to making that point of lasting change and political impact. And so that gives me confidence that we should not keep it. And so here we have deleted because it interrupts the introduction of the passage's main argument with a loosely related detail. Deleted because it weakens the passage's influence on the importance of work done by several influential First Ladies. Well, C is the closest to what I was discussing because it does interrupt the main point, and it is a loosely related detail, but not significant. Great, so now let's look at number 3. Which choice is most consistent with the writer's position as established in the passage? Most consistent. So this, if we look back at number 3, Abigail Adams, the second First Lady in America, was the first to assume a protruding role. So we're looking here. Unlike her predecessor, Adams was outspoken, well-educated, and quickly developed a reputation as a staunch partisan defender. And so this is all pretty positive. So a protruding role. And so this is essentially a way of asking, what does protruding mean in context, or what might substitute within for protruding. So I'm going to say a influential role would be my guess, influential. And so let's see which one matches that. Most consistent with the writer's position. And so the writer's position, actually, this question is actually not asking, what could go in place of number 3, but what most fits within the author's meaning and intent of within the rest of the paragraph. And it's pretty positive, influential, and it's a pretty positive regard. So protruding, does that mean influential and positive? Well, sort of. Protruding means kind of standing out, but it has a bit of a negative connotation, so a bit negative. And so I don't think it's that, but I won't cross it off yet. And then what about obtrusive, an obtrusive one? So again, let's say maybe you didn't know what that meant, and so I'll skip that for now. What about a prominent one? Prominent does mean influential, and it is pretty positive, so that one has 2 checks in its favor. An ostentatious one. Ostentatious. Say, yeah. So this one also does not fit, but say you didn't know what that meant and you only had this to go off of. Well, in this case, you should always guess because there is no guessing penalty. And so even if you have it down to this and you're thinking, well, maybe this one isn't it, so go ahead and cross that out, and then you're left with these 3. If you're getting a pretty strong signal from the smiley face and 2 checks that this does fit with the writer's position with regard to Abigail Adams, then go ahead and select C, and in that case you would have been right, because an obtrusive actually means something very similar to protruding, so it's kind of sticks out but kind of in a negative way. And then ostentatious is another word that kind of means braggy or showy, and so it has some negative connotations, and so that would have been out as well. So I'll do one more question and then we'll wrap it up because of time, but let's take a look. So number 4, so this is a stemless question again, so I want to look at question number 4, should it be changed or not? And so let's see. So you had a protruding rule, and her influence is so well known that opponents claim the president refused to make any appointments without her approbation, and aspiring politicians sought her endorsement. And so this is a verb, and so her influence is so well known. Is any change needed? Is there any kind of grammatical error at all? Well, I think there is, because if you notice, the tenses of the rest of the sentence are claimed in the past tense, refused in the past tense, sought in the past tense, yet is in the present tense. So I think what would fix this is was, and so her influence was so well known that all of these politicians helped her and admired her. Great. So that is a glimpse at what the SAT writing and language section looks like within the context of a real passage. And what I want to emphasize there is that the context of the passage, so all of the parts before and after the underlined portions, are very important for you to pay attention to, because they inform the answer of all of the questions that you're prompted and what you need to look into in the underlined portion. And so I know we didn't get through all of it, but if you want more practice with this passage or those like it, go to Official SAT Practice and do those practice sessions either untimed if you're just starting out, or do them timed so that you can simulate the real situation. Now, the last thing I'll share with you is an SAT badge, a Khan Academy badge for attending this class. And so go ahead and look in the chat room, and we'll be sharing a link to a badge that you can get for attending this class. And what you'll do is click on the link, head to Khan Academy, and then log in. And once you log in, you'll see in the top right-hand corner of your screen a notification pop up that says, hey, you've got the Khan Academy SAT writing badge. And so I'll leave you with that. And then for those of you who are taking the SAT this Saturday, a few tips I would share is just to relax ahead of the test. Don't stress out. Don't try and cram 10 practice tests beforehand. What's most important right now is really getting enough rest, eating well, and preparing all the materials and admission ticket and pencils that you need for test day. Don't try and do any crazy cramming before Saturday, because you've just got a few days left, and it can often be counterproductive to stress yourself out. On Khan Academy, in our tips and strategies section, we also have a number of articles for what you should be doing the week before and the day before, and how you can get ready in those last 24 hours. So if you're taking the test this Saturday, best of luck to you. And for those who have been with us over the course of these 3 classes, I hope this has been helpful for you. And I know it's been fun for me and for all of us at Khan Academy. So thanks so much for joining us, and we might see you again in the future. Take care.